Hey, it's Mike here, and today I'm going to respond to Dr. Mike's very recent video about how he had alarmingly high levels of cholesterol.
I didn't expect this at all. My cholesterol is through the roof, and I don't want to have a heart attack. I don't want to die. It was a brutal wake-up call for me.
I first want to say it is very commendable to take a personal flaw and expose it on social media and make it a teachable moment. Most people on social media do not want to expose any of their flaws. You've seen the filters that exist nowadays. They're ridiculous. That being said, in this video, I do want to talk about how some of the goals that he was setting in terms of cholesterol as ideal are actually maybe a little bit flawed. We're going to go into the science on that. And then there was also a food that him and a lot of people who eat a standard American diet think is like a great healthier food in a healthier direction, and I'm going to be arguing against that as well. Also, I just want to say that this video is sponsored by Seed with their daily Synbiotic. They're super eco cool company, so we're going to get into that in a little bit, but let's just go. For those that don't know, Dr. Mike is a doctor that also has a YouTube channel, and his recent video, which was titled "This Was My Wake Up Call," which is the one we're covering, has over 1 million views, so a lot of people are seeing this. And I will say he does great on a lot of subjects, in my opinion, but then there are some that I have to disagree with a little bit, like the time you may remember that I responded to his video that was sponsored by the Pork Board, where he was more or less making some excuses for red meat consumption and eating pigs and on and on. But it appears that he took that video down, or I'm just really bad at searching YouTube, despite it being my job for like over 6 years. Anyway, that means that he noticed that maybe it wasn't the best public health message and took it down, or who knows the story behind it. Either way, it appears that he tends to try and fix things. So in this video, he actually does 2 blood tests, one when things were really bad and then one 5 weeks later. And just at the starting point, he says this is how it happened.
My cholesterol levels were quietly going through the roof because I was consuming a lot of saturated fat, a lot of fried foods, unhealthy foods, a lot of red meat, giant steak, like it was way too much red meat.
He also said that he was eating a weird schedule where he's almost intermittent fasting and then binging all of these atherogenic foods, but still only eating like 2,300 calories, which explains why he was able to maintain a normal BMI. I mean, I'd be starving if I was eating that little. He then calls in Dr. Danielle Bellardo, who is a cardiologist who, as far as I know, is vegan, and they don't mention she's vegan. That's neither here nor there, but she does give him some good advice of course, lowering your dietary cholesterol and eating at least 60 grams of fiber a day and lowering your saturated fat intake. So he does flip his diet around a bit, and he tries to get fiber through various ways until he discovers that he likes black beans, but he did say that he had a bunch of discomfort in the beginning, but then once he got over that hump, he felt better than before. As many of you know, beans are the #1 dietary predictor of elderly survival, according to this study, so they're pretty awesome. Goes without saying that your gut has to adjust to an increased amount of fiber, and we'll talk about the gut a little bit more in a second, but there is one food that is part of his strategy for, again, lowering his cholesterol that I just couldn't help but responding to, and that is chicken. So he was eating a lot of red meat before, of course, but then he goes, oh, I'm going to shift to chicken. It's probably healthier. He didn't say he was going crazy with chicken or anything like that, but I just had to cover it because it's a notion that most people have. You know, it's a white meat, therefore it's got to be healthier. I mean, heck, even the American Heart Association says, yeah, switch to chicken. However, there are 3 major problems with chicken. 1, the cholesterol level itself is roughly equivalent to red meat. 2, the saturated fat is comparable, not quite as high, but very comparable to red meat. And then number 3, people feel comfortable eating way more of it just because they think it's healthier. Back to the cholesterol intake point, yes, here is a chart from one of my older videos on chicken, highlighting the different types of chicken and some red meat. And yes, you can see, you know, the cholesterol content is pretty much the same across the board. In some cases with skin, higher. I'm just so happy I don't eat skin anymore. That always grossed me out. Anyway, it also appears to be the #1 meat source in the US diet of cholesterol, right behind what also comes out of chickens, which is eggs. Now, in terms of saturated fat, it depends on the type of chicken body part you're eating, but looking to a chicken wing, it's maybe, 17% lower saturated fat than beef, for the most common type of beef that people are eating. And other chicken body parts are a bit lower, but again, people eat way more of this stuff. And this isn't just a vegan trying to get you to eat less of his animal friends with some vegan propaganda. No, I mean, looking to a dairy scientist and his team, they were also surprised at chicken's effect on LDL, or bad cholesterol, when compared to red meat. Looking to this randomized control trial, which was a crossover trial, which is even a better design, one of the authors, Ronald Krauss, says, quote, When we planned the study, we expected red meat to have a more adverse effect on blood cholesterol levels than white meat, but we were surprised that this was not the case. Their effects on cholesterol are identical when saturated fat levels are equivalent. And another important side note from that study is that they found that non-meat sources of saturated fat raised LDL less than meat sources, and that was mostly from, quote, tropical oils, probably coconut oil, which is still, again, raises LDL, just not as much. Now we're gonna hit on Dr. Mike's actual cholesterol levels before and after that 5-week period and what I think he is missing in terms of his ideal cholesterol goals in a second. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Seed. And by from them, I mean me talking about them. Seed offers a daily synbiotic, which is a combination of a probiotic and a prebiotic, and that prebiotic is in the form of an engineered capsule that is designed to survive all of the fury and fire of your digestive system so it can actually get the job done. That's probably where a lot of other probiotics fail. This little capsule is not just vegan, but it also contains over 53 billion AFUs, or really active bacterial cell units, from 24 different strains. You know, in the Matrix, Morpheus was like, red pill or blue pill. What about green pill, Morpheus? Where are you getting your probiotics? And the strains they chose have a ton of science behind them. As you can see here, we're talking about these strains supporting specific areas such as digestive health, gut barrier and gut immunity, heart health, skin health, and more. The synbiotic is delivered monthly in super eco packaging, some made from algae. A lot of it is biodegradable or compostable. Like, I feel like I could just take a bite out of this one right here, maybe. Anyway, you can get 15% off your first monthly supply of this synbiotic by clicking the link below in the description and typing Mike15 at checkout. All right, now let's get to that blood work. I was a little sad that he didn't just like paste his full lipid panel up there, but don't worry. We're gonna do a little bit of detective work, but going back to when it was bad, he says it got as high as a total cholesterol level of 265.
Initially, my total cholesterol, 265. Now, 217.
Thankfully, due to the lifestyle changes that he made, it dropped by almost 50 points down to 217, and that was over about 5 weeks.
If I check this 3 months later, it'd probably be even below 200, which is ideally where we want it to be.
But is that really ideal? Is under 200 really ideal? And that's where I feel like we need to get into the distinction between what is a good sort of public health goal in a population that eats a standard American diet that is potentially achievable versus what is actually best for your health. You know, there's some doctors like Dr. Esselstyn who say, no, actually 200 doesn't really appear to be good enough. We have to be sort of down at 150 or lower, but that's where I want to bring the discussion over to LDL specifically, that bad cholesterol. Dr. Mike also has a sort of goal here, and that is...
The general goal is we want to get the LDL cholesterol below 100.
And that brings us to an LDL goal, which might be a little bit better. The corresponding range that Esselstyn mentions is 50 to 70. This is even put forth by Loren Cordain, who started the paleo diet. I don't think anybody on the paleo diet has gotten there, though. So before we get into the case for why 50 to 70 seems to be legit, his LDL to start with was 185. He didn't mention his LDL after, so we'll have to take a rough guess. His original LDL was 69% of total, approximately, and from previous studies, averaging around 200 total. LDL was about 60% of total, so giving him some slack, I'd say he could be as low as 125 LDL. So he's probably still 25 points away from getting under his optimal level, and he's still probably roughly doubling the optimal level put forth by Esselstyn and others. All right, now let's go over what I think the best evidence for this 50 to 70 range is, and that is to this study, this chart, which may be familiar to some of you. Before we get into the details of the chart, it's just worth noting that this study looked at about 1,800 people who did not have your conventional cardiovascular disease risk factors. They did not smoke, they did not have high blood pressure, and their average age was about 45, so a lot of people in the study were probably the same age as Dr. Mike. Now to the chart, no atherosclerosis is below that 0% line, and then you have atherosclerosis above that, looking at, you know, how many different sites there were and how severe it was. But you can just get an idea that there's maybe a section that has no atherosclerosis detected. It's not a huge group or anything, but we're talking 50 to 60 is not seeing any atherosclerosis, and 60 to 70 is seeing a bit, but you can start to see why that 50 to 70 range might be a good place to be compared to the rest. Also of note, we have to look at that perhaps 80 to 100 group, which is where Dr. Mike is aiming to be. It's not really noticeably better than the 100 to 120 group, I mean, you're still seeing issues there. There's not really a huge difference between those 4 bars at all. And then we have to think about where he came from, up around 150 to 160, the highest bar, down to around, 120 to 130, and there's not much of a difference there either. Back to the Loren Cordain paper, this is corroborated by this chart of over a dozen studies where they say from the trend line, atherosclerosis progression likely stops around an LDL of 67. From this other chart, the line for heart disease events also crashes down super low there as well. So when it comes to Dr. Mike, did he make a really big improvement and that's going to help him? Yes, but I kind of get the drift that he's like, this is where I am now. This is a great place to be. Hopefully it'll go down even more, but correct me if I'm wrong, it didn't seem like he wanted to make further changes.
So now I have to keep my cholesterol low and healthy by continuing this lifestyle. That doesn't mean I won't occasionally indulge in some pizza or burgers or like chicken nuggets or something, but I've learned to love fiber-rich food.
But the only way that he would get there is to continue to lower that animal fat and saturated fat in general. That would bring him potentially down to 50 to 70 if he has the genetic potential to be there. Some people might not unless they go like really low fat. We need more studies on that. But yes, from a lot of vegan studies, they just naturally average in the 60s. So it seems likely that he could just get a lot lower if he just kind of nicks out the animal fat, But in the end, I also want to reiterate that Dr. Mike deserves some appreciation here for sure for being like, this was my fault. This is the horrible stuff that I ate. And by eating better in this way, eating lower saturated fat, more fiber, I was able to lower my cholesterol. It's awesome that that's being shown to 1 million people. Like, that's great. However, I think we need to deconstruct that conventional ideal LDL and total cholesterol cutoff because it is simply an improvement. It is not ideal by any standards, especially when we can see what an ideal level would be from studies like the one I showed you. And finally, in terms of cholesterol, the notion that eating chicken instead of other meats is somehow going to make you way heart healthy is just not backed by the data. It surprised even the scientists. And those scientists also have a good case for eating things like plant meat alternatives. Even if you're gonna end up getting some saturated fat from that, you'll be doing better off. But he did say that he got Danielle Belardo in there to tell it to him straight, more or less.
Because I need someone to be objective, I reached out to my good friend, Dr. Danielle Belardo.
And I think she did a pretty good job, but to tell it really straight, you could definitely be removing more animals from your diet and having a better benefit. And speaking of benefits, back to that seed symbiotic, whose packaging I may or may not have eaten as a mid-video snack. Again, the link is in the description. And you can use Mike15 for 15% off that first month. And thank you so much to them, and thank you for watching. Finally, let me know down below what you think about Dr. Mike's journey, and you can always help out by liking, subscribing, sharing the video, and all that good stuff. All right, see you in the next one.